Welcome to In Sheep's Clothing, a comparison of Christianity, cults, and world religions. Brought to you by sheepamongwolves.org. Despite the common belief, every road doesn't lead to God. Join Pastor Chuck Lewis on a journey down the twisted and winding theologies of some of the biggest belief systems in our world today, as we separate the dark perversion of the false from the light and truth of God's Word.
The seeds of what was later to become the Mormon religion were birthed out of the mind of one Joseph Smith Jr. Joseph Smith Jr., the prophet, better known to the residents of Palmyra, New York, as just plain Joe Smith. Joseph was born in Sharon, Vermont on December 23rd, 1805, the fourth child of Joseph and Lucy Smith. Joseph Smith Sr. was a mystic, a man who spent most of his time digging for imaginary buried treasure. He also attempted to mint his own money, which at least once brought him into conflict with the local authorities. Dr. D. Michael Quinn, in his book Early Mormonism and the Magic World View, thoroughly documented the fact that both Joseph Smith Sr. and Joseph Smith Jr. were avid treasure seekers. Joseph Smith, the founding prophet and president of the new church organized on April 6, 1830, had unquestionably participated in treasure seeking and seer stone divination, and had apparently also used divining rods, talismans, and implements of ritual magic. His father, one of 8 witnesses to the divinity of the Book of Mormon, and later the church patriarch, had also participated in divining and the quest for treasure. Quinn also states in his book that Smith was interested in treasure seeking even after he became the president of the LDS Church, and that the occult dimensions of treasure digging was prominent among the first members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles organized in 1835. Now, Mormon historians have avoided every indication that Smith owned a peepstone or a seer stone, but Dr. Quinn's book includes photographs of Joseph Smith's actual seer stones. After refusing to keep silent about his unflattering research, Dr. Quinn was excommunicated from the LDS Church in 1993. This is, however, a growth in honesty among Mormon historians. J.B. Allen and G.M. Leonard revised their book, The Story of the Latter-day Saints, where they discuss Smith's youthful experiments with treasure seeking. In turn, the Mormon Church increased its transparency in 2015 by publishing a photograph of Joseph Smith's famous brown seer stone that he used for treasure hunting and translating part of the Book of Mormon, although they explained it in terms of early 19th century folklore while obscuring its occult and unbiblical nature. 2 years later, a Mormon general authority, Marcus B. Nash of the 70, admitted in the Ensign magazine that Smith used a seer stone that he placed in a hat to translate the Book of Mormon. The mother of the future prophet was, as much as her husband, the product of the era and her environment, given as she was to extreme religious views and belief in the most trivial of superstitions. Lucy Smith wrote a very revealing book in 1853 about her son Joseph, which she titled Biographical Sketches of Joseph Smith the Prophet and His Progenitors for Many Generations. However, it suffered the wrath of Brigham Young, the first successor to Smith, who brought about the suppression of the book on the grounds that it contained many mistakes. Young stated that, should it ever be deemed best to publish these sketches, it will not be done until after they are carefully corrected. Mrs. Smith was herself incapable of writing such a work, so the ghostwriting was done by a Mrs. Martha Jane Knowlton Corey, who faithfully recorded what came to be known as Mother Smith's history. 1820 proved to be the real beginning of the prophet's call. It was in that year that he was allegedly the recipient of a marvelous vision in which God the Father and God the Son materialized and spoke to young Smith as he piously prayed in a neighboring wooded area. Joseph records the incident in great detail in The Pearl of Great Price, Joseph Smith History 1:1-25. Here he reveals that the two personages took a rather dim view of the Christian church and the world at large, and announced that a restoration of true Christianity was needed, and that he, Joseph Smith Jr., had been chosen to launch the new dispensation. The Mormon Church has always held the position that they alone represent true Christianity. Mormon leaders have taught that after the death of the apostles, true Christianity fell into complete apostasy, making it necessary for a restoration. It's interesting to observe that Smith could not have been too moved by his 1820 heavenly vision, for in a short time he once again took up the habit of digging for treasure along with his father and his brother. History tells us that the Smith clan never succeeded at their attempts at treasure seeking. In later years, the prophet greatly regretted the superstitious expeditions of his youth and even went on record as denying that he had ever been a money digger. But the evidence doesn't lie. In fact, the evidence, along with statements from Smith's mother, have proven beyond any reasonable doubt that the prophet was a confirmed peepstone addict, that he took part in and personally supervised numerous treasure digging expeditions, and that he claimed supernatural powers that allegedly aided him in these searches. Joseph Smith Sr., in an interview later published in Historical Magazine, May 1870, clearly stated that the prophet had been a peepstone enthusiast and treasure digger in his youth, and further that he had also told fortunes and located lost objects by means of a peepstone and alleged supernatural powers therein. Substantiating Joseph Smith Sr.'s account of his rather odd activities is the testimony of the Reverend Dr. John A. Clark after exhaustive research into the Smith family's own neighborhood. Long before the idea of a golden Bible entered their minds, in their excursions for money digging, Joe used to be usually their guide, putting into a hat a peculiar stone he had, through which he looked to decide where they should begin to dig. John A. Clark, Gleanings by the Way. The proceedings of a court hearing dated March 20th, 1826, New York versus Joseph Smith, contradict his mother's sanitized version of Smith's money digging and reveal that he had a certain stone which he occasionally looked at to determine where hidden treasures in bowels of the earth were. The hearing ruled the defendant, Joseph Smith, guilty of money digging. Peepstone gazing was one of the several occult practices deemed illegal in the 1820s. In 1820, Joseph Smith Jr. claimed a heavenly vision that had singled him out as the Lord's anointed prophet for this dispensation. However, it wasn't until 1823, with the appearance of the angel Moroni at Smith's bedside that Joseph began his connection to the golden plates, or what was to become the Book of Mormon. According to Smith's account of this extraordinary revelation, recorded in The Pearl of Great Price, Joseph Smith History 1:29 through 54, the angel Moroni, the glorified son of one Mormon, the man from whom the famous book of the same name is entitled, appeared beside Joseph's bedside and thrice repeated his commission to the allegedly awestruck treasure hunter. Smith did not write this account down until some years later, but even that fails to excuse the blunder he made in transmitting the angelic proclamation. This confusion appears in the 1851 edition of The Pearl of Great Price, where Joseph Smith identifies the messenger as Nephi, an entirely different character found in the Book of Mormon. Now, this unfortunate mixing up of the divine communication system was later remedied by thoughtful Mormon scribes who have exercised great care to flush out all the historical and factual blunders not readily explainable in the writings of Smith, Young, and other early Mormon writers. In current editions of The Pearl of Great Price, Moroni is identified as the nighttime visitor. Whether Nephi or Moroni carried the message to Smith apparently makes little difference to the faithful followers of Mormonism. In 1827, Smith claimed to receive the golden plates upon which the Book of Mormon is alleged to have been written. Shortly after this historic find, Smith began to translate the reformed Egyptian hieroglyphics inscribed thereupon by means of the Urim and Thummim, a type of miraculous spectacles which the angel Moroni provided for Smith. A whirlwind of contradictory accounts swirled through Smith's early history, particularly concerning his seer stones, first vision, translational work, revelations, and priesthood restoration. During the period that Joseph Smith claimed to be translating the golden plates, a school teacher lodged with the Smith family for the purpose of being Smith's scribe. 1827 to 1829, while Joseph Smith Jr. claimed to be translating the golden plates in Harmony, Pennsylvania, a school teacher from neighboring Manchester, New York, named Oliver Cowdery, had lodged with the Smith family. Oliver was a third cousin of Mrs. Smith. Oliver had heard about the golden plates and traveled to meet Joseph in Pennsylvania, where he was converted to the prophet's religion. Oliver was to be Joseph's scribe, and they took up the work 2 days after meeting for the first time. Oliver faithfully wrote down what Joseph said the plates read, although he himself did not observe the translation process because there was a curtain that separated them during the translation process. Over the course of time, as Joseph and Oliver became friends and the translation progressed, so did their spiritual zeal. They attained such spiritual heights that on May 15th, 1829, John the Baptist was dispatched by Peter, James, and John to their humble abode in Pennsylvania with direct orders to bestow the Aaronic priesthood on Joseph and Oliver. This amazing supernatural event is recorded in The Pearl of Great Price, Joseph Smith History 168 through 73, in which Oliver baptized Joseph, and then Joseph baptized Oliver, and the two spent some time blessing one another and prophesying future events which should shortly come to pass. Keep in mind that Smith was careful not to be too specific in recording these prophecies, because of the fact that more times than not, Mormon prophecies did not come according to schedule. This accounted for Smith's hesitancy in referring to details. From the state of Pennsylvania, after his initiation into the priesthood of Aaron, Joseph returned to the home of Peter Whitmer in Fayette, New York, where he remained until the translation was completed and the Book of Mormon was published and copyrighted in 1830. On April 6, 1830, Joseph, along with his brothers Hiram and Samuel, Oliver, and David and Peter Whitmer Jr., officially founded a new religious society entitled the Church of Christ, which was renamed the Church of the Latter-day Saints in 1834, and finally the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1838. This was the beginning of one of the more infectious cults in America. Mormonism had begun. Following this significant occasion, a conference consisting of 30 men was called by Smith on June 9, 1830. A few months later, missionary efforts were decided upon, and some of the newly ordained elders were set aside to become missionaries to the Indians. September 1830, a zealous preacher and a student of Alexander Campbell, leader of the Campbellites, Parley P. Pratt, was converted to Mormonism. And supposedly in November, a more powerful Campbellite preacher, Sidney Rigdon, saw the light and also converted along with more than 100 members of his congregation. Smith's religion began to spread outside of New York and Pennsylvania. Shortly after the original conference in Fayette on April 6, 1830, the core of the Mormon Church moved to Kirtland, Ohio, where in 6 years they grew to over 16,000 members. From Kirtland, Smith and Rigdon made their way into Jackson County, Missouri. Joseph and Sidney were not strangers to persecution. They suffered the humiliation of an old-fashioned tar and feathering, which was followed by a trip out of town on the proverbial rail. While in Missouri, Smith purchased 63 acres, which he deemed holy ground, and there he marked the exact spot on which he declared that the Temple of Zion, the earthly headquarters of the kingdom of Jesus Christ, was eventually to be built. It was in Kirtland that the first stake of Zion was established, and a quorum of 12 apostles was chosen, led by a first presidency of 3, and supervised by the president, Joseph Smith, the seer. The main reason for the Mormons to move to Kirtland, Ohio, however, was the extreme unpopularity of Smith and his revelations among the people who knew him best, and who regarded his new religion as a sham and a hoax. However, Smith claimed to have received a revelation from God as authorization for the move. Between the years 1831 and 1844, Joseph Smith Jr. allegedly received over 135 direct revelations from God, revelations which helped build Kirtland and later the Mormon metropolis of Nauvoo, Illinois. It was in Kirtland that Smith instituted his infamous practice of polygamy. Smith claimed that he was given divine revelation considering the practice of polygamy. As polygamy filtered down through the Mormon Church, the United States government threatened complete termination as well as the confiscation of all Mormon property in order to stamp out the practice. Polygamist Mormons argue that God gave no revelation for the disbanding of polygamy in 1890. They wholeheartedly reject the cowardly decision of the fourth Mormon prophet, Wilford Woodruff, who issued a manifesto in 1890 calling for the cessation of plural marriage. Instead, fundamentalist Mormons delight in publishing revelations of John Taylor, the third prophet and Mormon apostle of that period, who despised the U.S. government for the sake of polygamy. The religious convictions of the Mormon Church were sacrificed by their prophet Wilford Woodruff when he abolished polygamy for the sake of political and economic survival. As Mormonism grew and prospered in Illinois, and the practice of polygamy became wider known in the Mormon community and by outsiders, there also grew an increasing distrust of Joseph Smith Jr., which was greatly multiplied after one of his former assistants exposed the practice of polygamy in Nauvoo. Smith, known as General Smith at this time, became intolerant of the mounting criticism and ordered the destruction of the press. The Nauvoo Expositor published one issue on June 7, 1844, after which a riot ensued. The state of Illinois ordered Smith's arrest for inciting a riot. General Smith called his militia to resist, which in turn brought the charge of treason to the arrest warrant. Smith surrendered the following day with the help of his wife Emma, along with his brother Hiram and other Mormon leaders. However, on June 27, 1844, a mob of some 200 persons stormed the Carthage jail and brutally murdered Smith and his brother Hiram. This fatal act of violence gave Smith the unwanted crown of early martyrdom, ensuring his perpetual enshrinement in Mormon history as a true seer. During his lifetime, Smith won converts in Ohio, Illinois, and Missouri because he was relatively unknown in those areas. However, in New York, Smith was known by the most unflattering terms. As we end this part of our study of early Mormon history, we need to get a proper understanding of his character. Pomeroy Tucker, in The Origin, Rise, and Progress of Mormonism, has collected a number of sworn statements by neighbors of the Smith family and by acquaintances of Joseph Smith Jr. According to all those who testified at the time, Joseph Smith Jr. was known for his habits of exaggeration and untruthfulness by reason of his extravagances of statement. His word was received with the least confidence by those who knew him best. He could utter the most palpable exaggeration or marvelous absurdity with the utmost apparent gravity. One of the most interesting statements concerning the life and character of Smith was obtained by E.D. Howe, a contemporary of Smith's who did tremendous research during Joseph's lifetime. Howe obtained a statement signed by 62 residents of Palmyra, New York. This is what the statement said. "We, the undersigned, have been acquainted with the Smith family for a number of years while they resided near this place, and we have no hesitation in saying that we consider them destitute of that moral character which ought to entitle them to the confidence of any community. They were particularly famous for visionary projects, spent much of their time in diggings for money, which they pretended was hid in the earth, and to this day large excavations may be seen in the earth not far from their residence, where they used to spend their time in digging for hidden treasures. Joseph Smith Sr. and his son Joseph were in particular considered entirely destitute of moral character and addicted to vicious habits." Now, some may be wondering about those who spoke in favor of Smith's character. The amazing fact is this: there are no contemporary pro-Mormon statements from reliable and informed sources who knew Joseph and his family intimately. There have been past Mormon defenders who have exercised their persuasive skills to exonerate Smith and sanitize the foundation of the Mormon Church. However, in the past few decades, a group of honest Mormon historians have emerged who courageously accepted the historical record. With the assassination of Joseph Smith, a large majority of Mormons accepted Brigham Young as their new leader. In 1846, Young announced that the Saints would abandon Nauvoo. In 1847, after a fierce journey through the wilderness of the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains, Young brought the first group of Mormons to the Valley of the Great Salt Lake. Young is credited with the exclamation, "This is the place." The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints' destiny was sealed. They were in what was to become the state of Utah. Brigham Young ruled the Mormon Church for 30 years, and as is the case still today, he inherited the divinely appointed prophetic mantle of the first prophet. The same mantle is appointed to each succeeding president of the Mormon Church. Each president claims the same authority as Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. It is an infallible prophetic succession. The spiritual deed that the Mormons felt entitled them to take possession of the Great Salt Lake Valley was granted to them in June of 1848, when the first Mormon crops were saved from a plague of locusts by a vast flock of seagulls, which were common to the Great Salt Lake. According to Mormon teaching, God gave them visible evidence of his blessing upon the Latter-day Saints. While Smith can be credited with giving the movement its initial thrust, it was Brigham who supplied the momentum necessary to establish a genuine religion. Young was a character of many aspects, and you can't truly understand the theology of Mormonism without an understanding of the tremendous influence that came from Young and his teachings. Without Brigham Young, Mormonism cannot be thoroughly understood. Young was a man of unconquerable courage and possessed a cunning nature. Young was also given to fits of ruthlessness, which have been conveniently forgotten by many Mormon historians. Determined to control Utah, Young gave the order to those involved in the massacre of around 120 non-Mormon immigrants to remain quiet about what is now known as the Mountain Meadows Massacre. In September 1857, John D. Lee and a group of Mormon cohorts devised a plan to annihilate a wagon train of helpless immigrants. They mercilessly slaughtered unarmed men, women, and children. Now, one thing that we have to note is that while Mormons often point to persecutions brought upon them from the outsiders, this is one area of history where Mormons perpetrated an unprovoked massacre. They killed innocent people in cold blood. When Young was told about the massacre, he said, "As soon as we can get a court of justice, we will ferret this thing out, but till then, don't say anything about it." 20 years later, Lee was imprisoned, tried, convicted, and executed by the U.S. government for this vicious action. John D. Lee became the scapegoat. He alone was executed by a firing squad on March 23, 1977, while sitting on the edge of his coffin at the massacre's location. In the Confessions of John D. Lee, Lee confessed to his part in the massacre, but he swore that he believed and acted upon the approval of Brigham Young. In her book, The Mountain Meadows Massacre, Juanita Brooks states, while Young and other church authorities did not order the massacre, they did preach sermons and set up social conditions that made it possible. Young was the law in Utah. Mormonism today is at odds with many of the principles and practices of its early founders. It remains faithful to the basic tenets, but when those tenets come in conflict with government statutes or political influence, the Latter-day Saints have chosen to ignore or reinterpret the counsels of their two leading prophets, as in the case of polygamy. The history of Mormonism is vast and complex. It is a maze of books, testimonies, affidavits, photographs, hearsay, and opinions. It is only through careful analysis of the contemporary evidence that we begin to see a picture emerge that is consistent with verifiable facts. I sympathize for the average Mormon. He or she is, for the most part, honest, industrious, thrifty, and sincere in both the decree and declaration of their beliefs. I regret that they have accepted at face value a very carefully edited and recrafted history of the origin development of their religion, instead of examining the vast, credible sources which not only contradict but irrefutably prove the falsehood of what is a magnificently reconstructed history. As we continue to study Mormonism further, we'll see the unfolding drama of Mormon doctrine and the basis of this drama. We'll see the evolution of Mormonism and the pitfalls which exist when taking the gospel according to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young at face value. True history stands decidedly against Mormonism and the version they have created, especially when it comes to Smith and Young. There are vast amounts of verifiable documentation which all but a few Mormons seem content to ignore, but the facts are too evident to ignore.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of In Sheep's Clothing with Pastor Chuck Lewis. If you enjoyed what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, share, and rate our podcast. And feel free to leave a review, letting us know your thoughts. For more resources to help you deepen and defend your faith, visit our website at sheepamongwolves.org. Until next time, may you walk boldly, empowered by the truth of God's Word.